Italy, using the old style of producing religious statues. So she's not simply a wooden statue, and she's not simply a ceramic statue. Rather, the hands, the head, and the feet are all made separately.
Oh.
And attached to an old school framework, like a doll. And actually, when she's not mounted on her stand, her body is flexible. It's like carrying almost like a rag, not as soft as a rag doll, but the legs swing, the arms move. So this would be the old school technique, because you would devote incredible amounts of time to producing these delicate features of the face. You know, I encourage you to come forward and just take a look, because the detail in her face is exquisite. The detail on her fingers, you can even see the knuckles on the fingers. And so this is different from the statues we see in most of our churches as well, because of that level of detail. The softness of the features, and not having to worry about doing the entire body, which is invisible, allows the artist that time to really focus on the pieces that meet our eyes. And so again, you know, just like children have dressed their dolls for hundreds and hundreds of years, in a sense, images like this are made to be dressed. So again, you know, we have the experience of a statue is carved, and the garments are carved. And so here, garments are actually made, they're sewn. And they're sized to the image, and they're made for the specific image. So the beautiful thing about the old technique, and if you go to the old world in a number of churches, you'll see images like this, especially in the Mediterranean area. Italy, Spain, Portugal, you would find in churches some of the best older images are exactly like this. And so that rope technique for the body, but the exquisite modeling of the features. And so then it's simply a matter of when the artist is selecting his subject, then there are traditions associated with how certain saints are depicted, how certain scenes are depicted. And again, this is something we're not familiar with. We kind of assume when an artist paints a painting or carves a statue, what it really is first is an expression of his or her creativity. But that's not really how religious imagery is produced. There's actually a history of styles that have come together over the centuries. And so when we speak about Our Lady of Sorrows, there are things in the history of the church that our devotional life, our theology have said should be included in that depiction. And so an artist who's going to do Our Lady of Sorrows doesn't sit down first and say, how would I like to do it? The first thing he does is he studies the older images. And in light of how other artists have done it, then he says, how can I do something that's connected to that, but also perhaps a little different? And so what the individual artist would do would be to add certain nuances. He'll have a style of doing the stars in the crown. He'll have a way of doing the garments. He might have a preferred tone of black. You know, then there's different combinations for the hands and things like that. But it's out of the kind of traditional cluster of things then that the artist works. And the final product is, on the one hand, very creative, and yet on the other hand, very traditional, which means that the viewer who comes in, when the viewer understands the history, isn't lost. We know what we're looking at. The big thing with the image of Our Lady of Sorrows, first, obviously, it's Our Lady of Sorrows, not Our Lady of Happiness. And so the facial expression becomes important. It's not Our Lady in agony here, but it is Our Lady of Sorrow. And so you note there's a certain somber, a certain melancholy to her face. You'll see images of Our Lady of Sorrows often where she's crying. There's one we will have up at the Rock for Mass, which is much more dramatic. It's actually an expression of agony on Our Lady's face. And so again, there's a certain variety, but for an image that is for people to pray before, sometimes the strong emotions are understated a bit to encourage us to enter into kind of a less sentimental, more contemplative spirit. And that's what we have going on here. The great sign of Our Lady of Sorrows is the heart. And the original devotion to the heart of Mary is not devotion to her Immaculate Heart by name, it's devotion to the sorrowing heart of Our Lady. And because that goes back to the scriptures. Saint Simeon says to Mary on the day the Lord is presented in the temple that the child will be a sign of contradiction. And then he turns to Our Lady and says, and you yourself will be pierced by a sword. And so this image of the sword running through the heart in the prophecy that we find in the gospel is connected, the church has always seen its fulfillment in Our Lady at the foot of the cross. That is when the sword of sorrow runs through her. And so the great image of Our Lady of Sorrows is the heart with the sword running through it. Over the years, over the centuries, that heart of Our Lady has come to also have a flame on top of it. That's a more modern depiction, but very traditional. Again, it's talk about the heat of her love. And if you actually come close and look, you'll see that there's a lip on the heart, like it's the lip of a bottle. So if you had a heart-shaped bottle of wine, you'd have a lip on top where you put the cork in. That's exactly how her heart is depicted, as if it's a container. And the lid is off the container, and that heart is like a little furnace, and the flames are shooting out the top. And so it's a subtle expression of just the heat of Our Lady's love for her son, but also then the magnitude of the suffering, as if her heart was boiling over. And then the sword which pierces it. And which pierces it on the one hand to relieve it, but which pierces it, as Simeon said, so that the thoughts of other hearts could be revealed. Her heart is pierced so that our hearts can be opened. She's crowned because, again, we recognize it is the woman who kept her station at the foot of the cross who has been elevated to the status of queen of heaven and earth. And so, again, the halo with the 12 stars is the reminder of the glorious vision from the book of Revelation. I saw a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars around her head. So it is the suffering virgin who is also the glorious virgin. And when we crown this image, we are also saying that Our Lady is glorious in her suffering, which is an odd thing to say, but an important thing to say. And then there's this lovely detail that one sees from time to time of the napkin. And that's the most common question we get on this image after "who is this?" is, what is that she's holding and why? What do you wipe your tears with when you cry? There you go. And what does the handkerchief do? It catches the tears. None of Our Lady's tears goes to waste. They're all at the service of our salvation. They're all at the service of mourning and honoring the sufferings of her son. And so this is a reminder. And again, it's a subtle echo of a line from the Psalms where the statement from the mouth of God is given, I have numbered all your tears. How much more so than the tears of Our Lady, which are shed for our salvation, and which are shed in honor of and love for her Son and the suffering that he endures for us. So we last year during Holy Week, we brought her